Good evening. This is Tennyson E Stead, writer and director of Quantum Theory, founding member of Eight-Sided Films. And today I'd like to talk about a very simple concept, which is the importance of when we feel the impulse to react to a situation as leaders in the entertainment industry or in any field. When we feel a sense of insecurity, when we feel threatened in any way. It is in our best interest, if we can do so, to stop the situation and hold off on choosing a course of action until we have digested the feeling of panic that is coursing through us and can make decisions from the perspective of moving whatever goal we have forward instead of trying to deal with the threat that's been presented to us. Because at the end of the day, just moving oftentimes our goals and our projects forward does inherently deal with the threat that's been presented to us. And what you have to understand about working in Hollywood is that almost nobody takes that space. Almost nobody makes that decision. All of our solutions to film finance today are literally built on the panic that producers felt about film finance 15, 20 years ago. They panicked, they made a bunch of crazy decisions, and they got lucky and those decisions worked, and now those processes are institutionalized. And whether we're talking about film finance, whether we're talking about creative decision making and the fads and market trends that zoom in and out of Hollywood, at the rate of 5 a week, and the panic scramble to try and be the next dark movie or the next whatever kind of movie is succeeding this week at the box office, or whether we're talking about abuses of power and we're talking about how those abuses of power happen. At the end of the day, those abuses of power happen because the person abusing the power is reacting to their own sense of insecurity and lording their power over someone else in an unsafe fashion, as opposed to looking at that insecurity, breathing through it, acknowledging it as a risk, acknowledging it as something that they have to deal with, and then finding a way forward, even though whatever circumstances have led them to feel insecure are prevailing. And at the end of the day, that lack of accountability is at the core of everything that we're seeing. And one of the most inherent and one of the most simple steps that we can take to establish that accountability within our own lives is when we do feel threatened, when we do feel insecure. Somebody explains to us an observation they've made about the film market that suggests that our film is likely to fail. Okay. That person presents a solution that to them seems obvious and institutionally accepted as the only way to move forward. What I'm saying is, that person was probably given this information by somebody else. That person probably panicked when they received that information. And then they were given this same answer that you're being given now to solve that problem. And for them, that solution became the answer to the panic. And my point is, don't try to answer the panic. You don't need to answer the panic. Your panic is a feeling. It's not an actual problem. And if you're feeling panicked and threatened, you're really not in a position to figure out whether or not what you're being presented with is a problem in the first place. So you need to isolate yourself from that environment, accept that what you're being presented with is a reality. Just the fact that you've been presented with it is a reality. You don't have to assume that whoever's explaining things to you is right or wrong. Just accept that it happened. And then take a serious, hard look at how to move your career forward in a world where the things that are happening to you right now are happening. There's a moment in my favorite cartoon of all time, which is Avatar: The Last Airbender, where an Earth Kingdom king named King Boomy explains to Aang that people look at energy in terms of push and pull, offense and defense. And he says there's lots of kinds of energy, and he illustrates that the third kind of energy in that moment is what he calls neutral energy, where you do nothing. And Aang doesn't like that. He doesn't like hearing that. But Bhumi makes the case that by doing nothing, you allow time to pass, and time carries sometimes solutions of its own. So permitting time to pass can be a useful action under the right circumstances. And if you're feeling panicked, and if you're feeling threatened by anything, in any way, shape, or form, then the last thing you want to do is define your craft and your relationships with your collaborators and your audience by the trauma that you're experiencing right now. You don't want that trauma to become a constant part of everything that you offer this community. So don't build on it. Take a deep breath, take a step back, digest the fact that you have experienced a trauma, whatever that trauma might be, whether it's the simple threat that your film is likely to fail, and that threat may or may not be valid. It may or may not be reasonable to think that that person is right. But the fact that you've experienced that threat may be giving you a sense of trauma, or it could be a physical trauma that you've experienced, like with my brain injury on set, or it could be an emotional trauma that you've experienced. These things, in various ways and on various levels, are happening all the time across the entertainment industry because it's inherently a risky industry. If you weren't a risk taker, you wouldn't be in this business. And being a risk taker, you're going to expose yourself to threats of various descriptions. And I'm not using coded language here to talk about sexual transgressions. I'm talking about, like I said, I'm talking about the threat that your movie might fail. I'm talking about ridicule. I'm talking about bad reviews. I'm talking about all the different kinds of trauma that are out there, of which, yes, absolutely, sexual abuse is one. And our job as content creators and our job as leaders, and the way that, in part now, the way that we can improve this community is by not basing our relationships and our interactions and our craft on that trauma. We can certainly use the trauma to educate. We can certainly process it and allow it to shape our work. But what we don't want to do is just reflexively pass that same trauma off to somebody else. We want to make sure that the buck stops with us. So the first thing we have to do is take reaction out of the picture. Disempower wherever that trauma is coming from by taking a deep breath, addressing the trauma within ourselves, starting that healing process, even if it just takes a minute, even if it's just a question of breathing, even if it's just that, or if it's a longer process, that's okay too. You know, if there's therapy involved, whatever it takes, digest it. And then we turn around and we choose a course of action that's constructive. We choose a course of action that allows us to build the Hollywood that we want to see, to deliver the shows that we want to share with an audience, and to build the collaborations and the community that we think serves the highest interest and the highest goals of our craft and the audience themselves. Picking and choosing that course is impossible to do as a reaction to shitty advice, shitty circumstances, etc. So take the neutral way when you have to. Take a breathe all the time, and then re-engage the work. You know, maybe it's as simple as cutting out and playing a video game if it's something small. You know, give yourself the time to see around the problem. Sleep. Our subconscious mind processes everything while we sleep. We can't learn while we're awake. We can take in information and store it, and then when we sleep, we gain perspective. So sleep on it. That's what that phrase means. and then come back and take the next step forward in a way that delivers on the promise of our community and your work and the community that you've built. That's how I've gotten through the brain injury. That's how I've managed to keep my community growing. And it's how I've managed to deliver excellent craft while dealing with the symptoms of a traumatic brain injury. It's by taking a step back when I feel panicked or overwhelmed and saying, okay, I need a moment right now before I make my next decision. And then making sure that I'm centered, making sure that I'm emotionally stable, and then moving forward. And I think Hollywood could do with a lot more of that kind of decision making. So I'm encouraging people to undertake that process. Thank you very much for watching. If you would like to subscribe, if you'd like to see more of these videos, please click the subscribe button. There's a thumbs up right over here. Give us a thumbs up if you like the video. And I'll have something else for you next week. If you have any questions, if there's anything you want to talk about, please let me know. My Twitter is at Tennyson E Stead, TennySoneestead. And you guys have a great evening. Take good care. Bye-bye.